And I just did. I don't know any jokes, so I'm not going to, I do, but I'm not going to tell the ones I know. Well, welcome back to those who were in here for our first conversation. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome to today's Reading the Culture, Reading as Resistance book fair. We are thrilled to have you here with us. I am Terry Freeman, Executive Director of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland, African American History and Culture. And we are thrilled to be able to have this book fair here today. We wouldn't be having this were it not for the generous support of BGE. So I would like you all to join me in giving BGE a hand for supporting this book fair and allowing us to do this. It is a part of, as I said, our Reading the Culture Fall Programming Series, which is really focused on fostering a space of learning, investigation, curiosity, imagination, and deep reflection grounded in a love of reading. Now, this particular panel is called Black Joy to Black Activism. And I would say that all of us need a little bit more joy in our lives. This has been a period of time where a lot of joy, frankly, has been kind of sapped out of the atmosphere and out of the community. And so we need to be encouraging joy as much as we possibly can. So this book discussion involves a panel with 6 children's authors and illustrators that are going to explore this idea of Black joy and Black activism in children's books. This conversation is going to be moderated by author Carole Boston Weatherford, and we are so happy to have her with us. She is a New York Times best-selling author of 3 Caldecott Honor books, which includes Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer, Spirit of the Civil Rights Movement, and Moses, When Harriet Tubman Led Her People to Freedom. A 2-time NAACP Image Award recipient, Carole has the soul of a poet and the heart of a historian. Her recent releases include Standing in the Need of Prayer, Unspeakable, The Tulsa Massacre, and RESPECT, Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. And with that, I turn it over to Carole Boston Weatherford.
Thank you. I don't know if Terry mentioned that I'm also a Baltimorean, and I am just
She's
delighted.
also a Baltimorean.
And I'm delighted to be back at the Lewis Museum, particularly for this event. And so I'm going to just go down, I'm going to introduce each person. So as I introduce you, just give a wave, please. Baltimorean Sara Jung is an illustrator and children's book writer. She has a BFA in illustration, creative writing, and book arts from MICA. Sara was born in Maine and grew up in Vancouver, Canada. Raised in a Korean household, her experience of varied cultures make her a fluid writer and illustrator as she is today. She enjoys listening to stories from different walks of life, and her unique yet nostalgic illustrations evoke the idea of children's memories and points of view. Middle schooler Bellen Woodard is founder of Bellen's More Than Peach project. As the world's first crayon activist and pioneer of skin-colored crayons, Bellen has transformed an entire industry with her global movement, and we need to give her a hand for that. She's received many awards and been featured by Scholastic, Time, and Nickelodeon. Bellen embodies self-expression and discovery, and one point that I can relate to is she has not one, but like I do, but 2 beagles. So my hat goes off to you if you have 2 beagles. NAACP Image Award nominee Olugbemisola Rhuday-Perkovich, otherwise known as Bemi, is the author of several children's books, including Operation Sisterhood, It Doesn't Take a Genius, a Kirkus Best Book of the Year, 8th Grade Superhero, a notable book for global society, and a notable social studies trade book. Her most recent release is The Sun Does Shine, An Innocent Man, a Wrongful Conviction, and a Long Path to Justice, with Anthony Ray Hinton and Laura Love Harden. Frank Morrison, besides being one of my collaborators, now I think he's like gone to the top of the list as my most frequent collaborator in a matter of a few years, is the award-winning illustrator of many books for young readers, including Jazzy Ms. Mosetta, winner of the Coretta Scott King John Steptoe Award for New Talent, Little Melba and Her Big Trombone, a Coretta Scott King Illustrator Honor Book, Muhammad Ali, and RESPECT, Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul, which won him the Coretta Scott King Illustrator Award. And that's a book that we collaborated on. Before becoming a children's book illustrator and fine artist, Frank toured the globe as a breakdancer. He lives in Georgia. Last but not least, and you've already heard from him this morning if you've been here a while, is New York Times best-selling author Derrick Barnes, the only children's book creator in history to have won the Kirkus Award twice. In 2018 for Crown, An Ode to the Fresh Cut, and in 2020 for I Am Every Good Thing. A recipient of a Newbery Honor, a Coretta Scott King Author Honor, the 2018 Ezra Jack Keats New Writer Award. He is also the author of the New York Times companion picture books, The King of Kindergarten and The Queen of Kindergarten. So we're going to get started. Let me first say that even though this panel is entitled Black Joy and Black Activism, I think all of us will acknowledge that Black Americans do not have a corner on joy, pain, or activism. In fact, BIPOC people have all faced and continue to experience trials and trauma and to triumph in the face of adversity in America. Joy and activism are on a spectrum. Our joy is in part due to our activism and our agency, just as a rainbow follows a storm. So let's kick it off. Will each of you talk about, first of all, why you create for children? So maybe we'll start with Derrick, and we'll just go down the line.
All right. How's everybody doing? You know, I kind of fell into writing for children. My first job out of college in 1999 was working at Hallmark Cards. And I wrote everything, you know, Mahogany, Between You and Me, Valentine, Christmas, the whole nine. And everyone there at Hallmark Cards were like published poets, award-winning illustrators, and everyone had representation. And I didn't know anything about a literary agent, but I was connected with one of the other writers, and I've been with my agent since 2004 now. And the first project he brought to me was with Scholastic. They had a Black imprint called Just For Us, and I signed my first 2-book deal in 2003 or 2004. And with each project, my wife and I we kept having babies. So I just kind of stayed with it. The more babies we had, the more children's books I wrote. So I just kind of fell into children, but it's so important because we are the gateway to children being introduced to literature and to fine art and to just the whole art world. So what we do, I feel like what all these people do is true, including yourself. Every time I see you, I'm just so geeked out because she just has so many amazing books. But what we do is so important to introduce, literacy and fine art to children. So I take what I do extremely serious.
Thanks, Frank.
Yeah, I believe, how did I get into it?
Well, you don't have to tell how you get into it, but why do you do it? Why do you create for children? You don't have to tell. You don't have to tell us.
I'm competitive, and so that's what happened to me. I was at Essence Art one day, and a couple of artists came through, and I was the king of the playground at Essence Art. I was killing it, I was #1 seller, and then next this guy named Kadir came through. Who this dude? Who this guy? Okay. And this other dude came through called Brian Carley. I don't think I know these people. They were just, one light skin, one dark skin. But either way, they came through, and I was like, yo, son, what y'all doing here? Okay, this is my spot. And then they left. I was like, where'd they go? And they went, they vanished. Just like as they came in, they vanished. And then I started picking up picture books for my children. And they reappeared. And I was like, what in the world? What is this picture book then? And, we just started, my children enjoyed it. And they reading the books to them. And I told my wife on Wednesday, I said, I'll be back. I'm taking them on Thursday and Friday to a book deal. And it didn't work out that way. Because they were candid as a king of the playground in that field. There was a whole different playground. And believe it or not, I knocked on every publishing house door with my portfolio. Y'all like my work? Like, no. And I got turned down by everyone. Everyone turned me down. And then I got sat down I knew some people at Dial Books, some from the Essence days, and they sat me down with these older women, and they brought me in this dark room, and they said there was one light. And they said, how dare you knock on our doors this way? And they sat me down for real, and they told me so much and planted why I should illustrate, what the purpose of it is. And it's not for competing, it's for the children. Right. And it's to be a blessing to the children. And after I picked up my face and I crawled out of there, they kicked me and everything. Believe it or not, I got a call from FX Barbershops in Jerusalem, and I got a call from Leonard Books, and they said they had 2 projects, and the one was Activism, and the other one was Sweet Music in Harlem. And believe it or not, I took those jobs. I worked on them. I thought about everything those killers were telling me in that Dow. The ladies were telling me, and I took it in the heart, and I said, you know what? I'm gonna do my best, and I hope they like it. And I showed it to them, they enjoyed it, then I sent it to my editor. And one of the greatest guy came off my first picture book. And that's how I got to this.
Sara, why children? Why create for children?
Oh, thank you. So the question was why children's books, right? I think for me, personally, I just children are just kind of innately curious and malleable and just open to so many different things. And to echo what Derrick said earlier, I think children's books are almost like a gateway to culture and information. And I personally believe that children's books are not just for children. I think there's an inner child within all of us that kind of longs to see ourselves represented and also seen and reflected in society that we navigate toward today. So I think children's books are just the most accessible and profound way to connect with people and one another. So I think children's books were an easy kind of media as an artist and as somebody who enjoys narrative storytelling to pick up and expand on. So yeah.
She didn't say easy, did she?
Sorry.
Was it easy, Frank? Benny, look at that, you're from Benny.
different question, Balance.
For me, I think that I started thinking about writing for children from a very, very young age. I grew up in a home where my parents were both immigrants, and story was just a big part of our lives. So they would always tell us stories about back home, which was Jamaica or Nigeria. And my sister and I were not allowed to watch very much television at all. We could watch PBS once a week. And so I would go to school and my friends would talk about the shows that they watched, and I would just kind of pretend I knew what they were talking about and be like, yeah, that was so good. And then I would go home and I would sort of make little books and like write stories for my little sister, and illustrate little books and make little stories for my sister. And first I gave them to her, then I started charging her for them, and trying to like get her to do my chores. But it was like a very joyful thing. And while we couldn't watch TV, we could always have books. We could go to the library and take out as many books as we wanted, and that was just such a treat, I felt like, for me. And in school, I would write stories because of all the books that I read, and sometimes I was able to do a different assignment than the one that was assigned, because I would say like, well, how about if I write a play about this instead? Can I do that instead? And the teachers were very encouraging, so that helped. And I moved a lot in my childhood. So I went to a different school every grade, and I was a very shy kid, and that was very, very hard. And my books were like my friends, and the books were sort of what nourished me. My parents worked very hard to have Black books in the home, so I had a lot that, even though I was very shy, sort of fed my imagination and my idea of what I could be. And so I knew from, I would say, high school that I wanted to sort of give that to other kids.
Is your mic working, Bellen?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so this is a two-part question. And Bellen is really the poster child, I think, for the first part of the question. And the first part of the question is your creative work a form of activism? And I think Bellen's definitely is. It's definitely a form of activism. So the second part of the question, Bellen, that you can tackle is, will you discuss why you chose to tackle the subjects or subjects that you do? Why did you choose to tackle the subject that you did?
Okay, so I think that my creativity is part of my activism because I call myself the world's first crayon activist, and I could have done anything. I could have, I saw a problem and I could have solved it any type of way, but I chose to do crayons just because I just really wanted to represent myself, and not just myself, but just a lot of other kids, and just not even just kids, just everybody, adults, and just people all throughout the world. And so I think that's where my creativity kind of comes in. And what was the other question? Sorry.
The other part is why you chose to tackle that subject. What made you decide, well, crayons need to be different, and I'm going to write about it?
So I wanted to just create something that no one's really ever done before or seen before. And so when I made my multicultural / skin colored crayons, I'm really the first person who's just made a brand focused on those kind of crayons and art supplies. And I named them all after all the skin color crayons after natural landmarks. But then there's a sub-name that says skin color, and so when anyone picks them up, they can see that all of them are skin color crayons, not just one shade of any color. And so they all know that their skin color is the skin color, their friend's skin color is just all just represented, and they can color with it and be able to see themselves with it actually color.
Yeah, I can remember growing up, and there was one Crayola crayon called Flesh. That one crayon, Flesh, and it was not the color of anybody in here. Okay, Demi? We're going to repeat.
And I should have asked you to repeat it before I took the mic.
Sure. Is your creative work a form of
Yes.
activism, and discuss why you choose to tackle the subjects that you do?
Yes, I really do think that storytelling, writing stories, writing stories, especially as a form of activism, when I think of the history for Black people and how there was so much work to prevent us from reading and writing. So just at that level, yes. And I was just talking yesterday about a quote from Bell Hooks where she said the function of art is not just to tell it like it is, it's to imagine what is possible. And so I feel like for me that is a big part of why I do what I do. I think that we as Black people, as BIPOC people, live in a world that tries to diminish us and not let us be our whole selves. I try to write stories, all different kinds of stories for all different ages, about us being our whole selves in the world and being free to be our whole selves in the world.
Yeah, so, what was the question? Sorry.
The question again is your creative work a form of activism? And discuss why you choose to tackle the subjects that you do.
Yeah, so I don't remember who told me this, but somebody told me that as BIPOC people, simply like existing in joy is like a radical act. And I think with terms of like writing stories and deciding to draw from our own personal narratives and also like what we grew up with and displaying that into books is like, yeah, a form of activism innately, I think. And when you were speaking earlier about growing up as an immigrant, like I really resonated with that because I also grew up as an immigrant, and like children's books were a way for me to like learn English at the time. And I think like my book that I only have like 2 books published, so I'm not as yeah, well, so and one of the books is about growing up with a father who was traveling back and forth from Korea and to America to like provide for the family. And I think just putting stories like that out there is and like showing people that we exist and is just yeah, activism. Yeah.
Do I need to repeat the question?
Oh, see, I don't know if mine is considered active. I don't know. I call it image conscience. That's what I like to call it. Because I grew up liking watching television and thinking that, you know, out of all the Africans in Africa, there was only one king of the jungle, Tarzan. Mm-hmm. Then I grew up watching something else called Little Rascals, and the poorest kid there was, I knew what you wanted to be him because he was a black kid, but what was the kids, you know, buckwheat, you know? I don't know, whoever casted them, were they activists for their, and then I grew up watching Thundercats, and I just realized Lionel was a lion. Where did lions come from? Maybe Lionel was South African. Was Lionel South African? I mean, so I don't know if it's called activism. I'll just call it whatever they decide to make those characters that were in predominantly African American cultures. They chose to make them to match their family members. And so I don't know if I'm just doing the same thing they're doing and calling what they're doing. Is that called activism? Because what I do is I have a whole series about, like even with Charles Schwartz, when we enjoyed watching him, but we didn't see anything about Franklin. Somebody wrote a story and asked them if they could add a black character. I think after Martin Luther King passed, I think they included Franklin. And I just feel like we're working on some stuff. We don't, how do I put it? I don't even think that you would call, I don't know if Harriet Tubman would be considered an activist if she thought she was, or she just thought she was doing the right thing at the time, because she had already freed herself and decided to go back. And so when I paint my pictures, and though I continue to go back and show us that we can be the heroes of the story. And I don't know if what's that considered, I let someone else label me, but I just feel like there's an absence of us in important roles. Prominent roles, because when I would turn my television on and look for something for my family to watch, man, that's hard to do. That's hard to find something. Black family doing something positive that's not shaking it. I'm not going into it. Doing all that other stuff, all that extra stuff. You know, I know we used to watch video music box back in the day with our parents. I saw old school Ralph McDaniel, Kid naked, all that. And we sit there and watch that, and we're like, Mom, we breaking like my mother, we go over, popping and locking, having a good time, right? Now I'm watching it with my daughter, like, hold up, what is this? Contest, what is this? What are we watching? And then, so I don't know what we're doing to each other, and I don't know what they're doing to us. It's like someone's got to figure out and say there's got to be morals at some point, and there has to be representation everywhere. I'm sorry, I have to talk about
yeah, I most definitely see myself as an activist. When I first got into this business in 2004, like the only black books that were winning, awards were about slaves, runaway slaves, civil rights. So think about us growing up, like we didn't have any bedtime stories, or just stories about children just being children. And so when I finally got into the mode of understanding what I'm doing and the work that I'm supposed to be putting out to the world, to be honest with you, I try to make work that make white people feel uncomfortable. And not in a negative way, but in their environment. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, which is predominantly white. So they don't see a lot of black joy. They don't see the middle class, the upper middle class black family. They don't see any of that. So I always want to create imagery that really shocks the system. Like, you didn't know that black men and black women love each other, that we are raising children to be brilliant, to be leaders. Like, I want to put that imagery in their face. Even when we go out in public, I have 4 big sons in my life. I want to scare the hell out of white people when we step into the room, but not in a negative way. Like, if you're not used to seeing black excellence, you're gonna see it. And I have a obligation. Like, we talk about the people that came before us. Like, we wouldn't be on this stage if it wasn't for people that really set the stage for us. Every time I go home in Kansas City, there's an 18-foot statue of Charlie Parker behind the Negro League Baseball Museum. If y'all go to Kansas City, you gotta check it out. It's on 18th and Vine. And I don't care what time of night it is, I sit out there and talk to Charlie Parker and let him know that I took the baton, brother, and I'm representing Kansas City to the fullest. And not only him, but everybody else that set the stage was black artists, black activists. And there's so many stories to be told. Like, our story did begin with slavery. And even if we just stick in this country, black people have always been fighting for freedom. Like, we were not okay with that situation. And I always want to tell, revolutionary stories about resistance, but also stories about black love, because that's activism as well. So everybody on this stage is an activist. You are an activist, brother, for sure.
I'm secretly. I don't want to get paid. Seems like we're going to go get paid or something.
I don't care.
We don't know who's listening.
That's right.
Everybody on the stage continue to make the most authentic books you can possibly make, and don't worry about these silly bands, man. Don't worry about it. Yeah.
So I'm going to add, I got another question, Derrick, and we'll start with you. Please you can probably do 2 examples. 2 examples of books by yours that fall under these categories: joy and activism. So 1 for each, and just, maybe 1 sentence about each book.
Joy probably is my most recent book, The Queen of Kindergarten. I wrote the book in first person. The companion book was wrote in third person. It's The King of Kindergarten. But again, here's this beautiful black girl, 5 years old, coming from this loving, supportive family. And I took the family example from how we raise our children. When all my boys were 4, I have something called the Daddy Summer Get Right Camp. So we would go to libraries, we would go to museums. They 4 years old, had to memorize poems and quotes from notable black people, and then go to the neighbors and recite these things. Because I know that when all of our babies step outside of our door, they are not going to be loved the way they are inside their home. So I was saying earlier, we got built them up with armor. So in this book, this girl is the queen of kindergarten, and not like ruling over people, but going into spaces with confidence, with self-love, like loving the texture of her hair and her beautiful skin, and also being kind, because that's what her parents have taught her. So that's the one with Black love. Activism, on Tuesday, I have my first graphic novel coming out. I wrote it, but I sat at the feet and took notes of the life of Dr. Tommy Smith, the brother that raised his fist up in 1968, Summer Olympics. And I've been on tour with him all week. And that book is beautiful, illustrated by, I don't know if you know Dawood on Woodward. Brother Man Comics. Yeah. So we make a super team, and I'm not gonna shy away from these book bans, man. Books are gonna be blacker, as a matter of fact. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So Frank, joy and activism. Give us one title for each.
Kick Push is about, I wrote that one. I became an author this year. Of course, I don't know how people cross it. Kick Push is about a little kid that moves to a new neighborhood and is trying to fit in. And is trying to figure out how he's going to fit in. No one likes escape. And so he realizes that he's going to try to fit in with everybody, do everything he wants to do, everything the kids are doing, I'm going to do that. He realizes he's just not good at it. And, he stands up for himself, and he said, at the end of the book, he ends up picking up the skateboard and fights all his friends and becomes a leader. And I think that's a part of, believe it or not, everything we do is activism. Everything I paint, and I hate to say it, I try not to, but the whole point is being a beacon of light, even with the graffiti, to artists that are out there to show that there's other ways of doing it. Others just writing on walls and tagging and all that kind of stuff. I put the graffiti in the book so they can see that a graffiti artist that really knows graffiti. I write with crews. Believe it or not, I still go out and write graffiti. I was writing last week. That someone authentic from that neighborhood is actually doing it. And that's what I try to be a beacon to my community, because when I was growing up, I didn't know you could be an illustrator. I thought that was the worst thing you could be, was an illustrator, because they made it seem like a fine artist illustration was selling out. And so me even painting in illustrations being a form of activism, because I'm showing that there's ways of being an artist that you don't, because everyone's not going to make it into the Metropolitan Museum, even though we need to have more work in there. But there's got to be other leaders, I guess, like ourselves, that kids can look up to. And so I say Kick Push is an activist book, but it's really about a kid skateboarding, what you think about it. The small print at the bottom is be you. Then any book that I do with Carole, I find myself looking back, skin boiling. Oh my gosh. Do you know what it takes to work on these books of slavery? Do you know what it takes? Could y'all imagine you have to look back and see your ancestors in chains, beaten, watching these, and then you're trying to find glimpses of that to actually put in a book, so you don't, and then you have to manage to put that in a book so people don't feel offended, but you have to put it in a way where people can understand it, where they won't, I got away with putting the, what's the name on his neck? When they used to put the slave collar, I put that on his neck, and I had to do the research. I was looking at Toni Morrison, and I bought a book on one of the books he said on black. I forgot what first. Either I did the research, and I'm like, what the? And then you're like, who could do this to other humans? And then you have to put that in a book, and then it's like a constant, damn, you go through PTS.
Yeah, you do. You honestly do.
You really do. It's a lot.
It's no small feat writing about our history.
No.
But it's important work, because a lot of young people don't realize how long the struggle's been going on. And I guess maybe they get reminded every time a black person gets killed at the hands of police or vigilante that the struggle's still going on, and but a lot of young people really kind of compress the struggle. I found that they thought that, okay, there was slavery, and then Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, and then Martin Luther King freed us again, and it's okay. And then we can, get Air Jordans,
Yeah.
But it's not, it's never that simple. And you do, when you do the research, you do absorb the pain.
Yeah.
But then you put it into a book and you buffer it with the words, and you make it age appropriate, and yet the images, and the words nevertheless pack a powerful punch because it's a hard truth. But it happened. So Sara, joy and activism, and maybe you got it all rolled up into one book and a dumpling. I don't know.
So yeah, I think activism involves a lot of connecting, seeking out your community and speaking to your neighbors. And I think with one of the books I made, Our World of Dumplings, is really reflective of that, where you connect with people with food, because we all gotta eat. And I think, I had an answer, but it just completely blanked. But I think activism, and I think joy and activism can be almost interlinked in that way, because it is all about just sharing and connecting and knowing who you sit next to, and so I think that's my answer.
For me, I think Operation Sisterhood was meant to be a very joyful book, and I wrote it to be a joyful book intentionally. It's about 4 sisters who live in New York City, in Harlem. They live a very non-traditional life. They're homeschooled, but their parents call it free schooling because their parents are really wanting them to be free within themselves. And they're musicians and artists. They have a band. They have a lot of animals in the house. And I started out writing it for a lot of different reasons. And one of the reasons was because I often find that the image that people have of New York City and of kids in New York City is not a very joyful one. And especially for Black girls, not being joyful, not being playful, and not having fun. So I thought about some of the stories that I read as a kid, where there were happy families and kids having fun and doing joyful things, but they were not Black families in those stories. And the stories that were, say, at school and in the school library that were sort of offered and pushed forward were always about Black people struggling. And this image that there was an appetite for Black pain and not the same appetite for Black joy. And so when I was writing, I was really thinking about that. And I ended up writing a lot of it during the height of the pandemic in New York City, when it was a very, very sad time in the city. And I really wanted, especially during that time, to give the kids sort of this, just remember how joyful you are. Remember how vibrant our communities really are. The people in our communities really, really are. I lived in 2 communities in Harlem and in Brooklyn, where a lot of times people have come in and said to me, oh, this neighborhood's getting so nice now. There was nothing here before, or I'm so glad. And so I really wanted to write about the warmth of the communities that have been there and that bring that joy in that book. And for activism, I would say Someday Is Now, this is Clara Luper and the 1958 Oklahoma City sit-ins. And Clara Luper was a teacher in Oklahoma City, and she took a group of students, some as young as 6, who sat in at Katz drugstore in Oklahoma City and desegregated that drugstore, and then went on for 6 more years desegregating businesses, local businesses. And I was just so taken by the way that she taught. She was a teacher by profession, but the way that she didn't just say, okay, this is what we're gonna do. She showed them what the world was. She showed them they were living in segregation. She took them to New York where they saw desegregated lives. She let them come up with what they were gonna do. And then I talked to students a lot about how those kids spent a year and a half preparing before they even did their first demonstration. And a lot of times kids think, when I'm working with them, that okay, we have this challenge or this problem that we want to demonstrate or protest about, so we're going to make some signs and go out tomorrow and protest. And so understanding the work that went in and what she taught them and the history that she gave them before they even started, and the way that she also did not shy away from, in her autobiographical account, the fact that she was afraid. And that courage doesn't mean that you have to just, everybody just goes out being all bold and like, I'm going to do this and this is going to be great. But she was very afraid and was very conscious of the trust that the adults and the parents in the community had put in her with these children, and went forward anyway. So that was very interesting to me.
Bellen, we're going to switch it. We're going to go to the next question. We're going to start with you with the next question. The next question is, how do your own experiences as a child and as a young reader inform your work? And so, Bellen, what I really want to know from you is, I want you to go back to the moment when maybe you were sitting with the box of crayons and maybe you went to your mom and dad and said something about what you saw in that box of crayons and what you didn't see. So tell us how you first became concerned about the issue of representation in a box of crayons.
Well, this was back in 3rd grade, so we were coloring like a lot because I was 8, and so we were coloring a lot because we were really little. And I started to notice that whenever someone asked for the skin color crayon, they always meant the peach color crayon. And I heard that language for a really long time. And as you guys said earlier, I did actually learn later that there was a color named, the peach crayon was named Flesh, but like years ago. And so there was that. And so I just kind of naturally learned to just hand over the peach crayon because that was just what we were all used to, and that was all really what we just did. And so one day when I just really noticed it, I went home to my mom and I told her about it, and she suggested for next time for me to hand over the brown crayon instead of the peach crayon. But I didn't want to do that because I knew that if I didn't like being handed over the brown or the peach crayon and my skin color not being peach, no one else would like being handed the brown crayon and their skin color isn't brown. And so I told my mom next time I'm actually going to ask what color they want, because it could be a number of any different beautiful colors. And that's what I did when I went back to school, and eventually my teacher started using that language, and then my whole classroom, and then my whole school. And I still use that even now. I mean, we may not color as much, but I still do use it. And I'm in 7th grade, but I'm young for my grade, actually, I'm 11. So yeah, I still use that language, and people at my elementary school still use that language, and people at other elementary schools still use that language, and I think yeah.
Thank you, Bellen. Let's go to Derrick, and then we'll work our way back down again. Do you want me to repeat the question? How do your own experiences as a child and as a young reader inform your work today?
I think we all kind of share the same experience of the first book that we saw that actually featured a black child was Ezra Jack Keats' Snowy Day. And that was the first book that I remember holding and seeing myself as being born in Kansas City. It snowed a lot, we played in the snow a lot. And it was just a book about a black child being a child. And so, you see the possibilities that we don't have to always stick to the same narratives, even though those stories are, definitely important. I think it's also important that we show joy, like we were talking about joy before, the fact that this boy comes from this loving family, his daddy is hardworking, his mother is at home, he has grandparents. And that was my first introduction to seeing a black character. So I always kind of harken back to that. I won the Ezra Jack Keats Award 2018, and I may be working on something else in regards to that project. I can't really talk about it. I want to tell everybody because I'm so excited about it. But just, going back to what I said before, continuing that legacy of black excellence and black love. And that was my first experience. Ezra Jack Keats, who's an excellent writer. He's from Brooklyn too.
Repeat the question?
Okay.
How do your experiences as a child and as a young reader inform your work today? And they don't have to be, it doesn't have to be like when you were in elementary school necessarily. Maybe it was when you were a teenager and you started breakdancing or something. Who knows?
Okay.
How do you want to answer?
Well, I never had the right answer. See, I grew up poor, and so we didn't have picture books. We had, I drew on whatever I could draw on. We watched television, we played outside. And so my first black character that I saw that was a character was a ski man that someone did, a graffiti character. And then I learned how to draw my graffiti characters and match them theirs. We did have encyclopedias, but they were the Disney ones that we used to get. And so we used to see, but we didn't see any black characters in there. I think we saw that guy, I think it was Amos. Something he did, one of those cartoons, we ended up in trouble for later. But either way, we didn't see a lot of that of ourselves. The good thing about being poor, money, well, everybody was poor, so there was no one that, we was all broke. So we all did things that broke people did. We did, like broke stuff. We did things like, we ran fast. Right. And then we would go and jump over stuff. That's what we did. And things like, who can stare at you the longest? That was our game, because we couldn't have a Rubik's Cube. Yeah, you look at the stare at somebody. Nobody had a Rubik's Cube. No one had that. What was that? A Slinky? That stuff we saw on TV. We were like, okay, all right, Slinky, we could find something. We used to make stuff. So honestly, we used to make things all the time. We had my grandmother had a junkyard in the back of our house, and so we would find things and just make stuff. So we couldn't afford Star Wars, so we made our Star Wars. We had wires, because they were building our neighborhood, so we built wire stuff, and wiremen and things like that. And they would end up being better than, you had that one rich friend, he had all the toys. His name was Eric. You go to Eric's house, he had cereal. Not King Vitamin, not that Kaboom. Kaboom always looked good, it didn't taste good. But he had real Captain Crunch with the toys in it. And so he would hide them when we come over. And so either way, I try to make my characters, and I remember where I came from. And I know, my children don't grow up, they can't take, my refrigerator got a TV on it right there. I'm like, go watch the refrigerator, shut up. That's what we tell my kids now. Go watch the refrigerator. So they don't know anything about this kind of lifestyle, but I don't forget where I came. I never will forget where I come from or where I came from. And I know there's children out there that are suffering, that are going through what I went through as a child. So I always represent from the poorest to the first. And I really don't care about the bourgeois, because I really want to represent the inner city or the kids that didn't have anything. That's what I would love to represent the most, because I can tell you, we were very athletic. Very athletic. You had to walk everywhere. Because if your bike broke, that was the last bike you was getting for the rest of your life. And I found out the hard way. But either way, that was my answer.
So
You didn't really repeat the question.
maybe.
Next time we're gonna have a handout. Okay? How do your experiences as a child and as a young reader inform your work today?
So as a kid, like children's books was like a way for me to learn, because I've always been a very visual kid, and I grew up partially in Korea and then again also in Canada. And so when I was reading children's books in Korea, a lot of the contents were very like whimsical, and the cultural undertones were very different from American or Canadian books. And so when I immigrated to Canada and started reading English books, it was a way for me to learn English, and it was also a way for me to gain a quick understanding, because it was also paired with illustrations and drawings. And just as an adult, like I think I was always gravitated toward illustration, just because it was one of the most accessible ways to share information. And I think illustrations, like you don't really necessarily, like recognizing an image you don't have to necessarily have to have like an elite education to understand like it's a drawing of a dog eating a bowl of food or something. And I think now as like an adult illustrator, I find myself trying to bring back like the stories I recognized as a kid in Korea, and a lot of the emotions that evoke from those stories are so unique and different from like the American books that are made today. And I think does that answer the question? Yeah. But, yeah.
I think I answered a lot of it already. I just, in terms of books, some of the books that I think really influenced me from childhood were like Cornrows by Camille Yarbrough, Honey I Love, Eloise Greenfield, and I have a collection of Caribbean folk tales that I read over and over. There was a series called the African Writer Series that I read a lot. I had like Carole and Chinua Achebe and like those books. And then I also read, like, because we were allowed to read whatever was in the house, you could just get up and read. So I read like, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, like in 3rd grade, and I read Autobiography of Malcolm X at the same time. Like, so I read a lot of these stories very young, and they kind of filled me up in a different way. And then I liked books like Jane Austen. I used to read, and I think it comes out sort of in Operation Sisterhood. I would read about, she would talk about accomplished women, and it was like you learned how to do all these different things. And so I was like, I want to be an accomplished woman. So I'm going to learn how. So I would like try out a whole lot of different things as a child, and I write about kids who do a lot of different things. So a lot of different influences.
Bellen, tell us, maybe name 3 of your favorite authors, children's book authors or illustrators.
Well, authors, I can think about this because I don't. Oh, I know one. So the like very hungry caterpillar, like
Derrick
Barnes.
And that's very colorful, so I can see how that might, how his work might be an influencer. Why you might like that.
You see, I don't really remember a lot of the authors.
Well, tell us the title of the book if you want to. We might know the name of the author. Okay.
The very hungry caterpillar, Eric Carle, and then that book, the Please Baby Please, that
Oh,
one.
that's Spike Lee and his wife Tanya Lewis Lee, and illustrated by Kadir.
And then another book that I read a lot when I was little was probably A Splendid Friend Indeed. Nobody probably knows that book. It's like a random book that I had in my house that I read all the time. But
What was it called?
A Splendid Friend Indeed.
Oh, that's Suzanne Bloom. Yeah, I know her. Yeah, she's really, that's a really nice book. It's about a bear and a goose, right?
Yeah.
They're really good friends. All right, so I'm not sure of the time, but tell me the time.
You have 5 minutes.
We got 5 minutes. Okay, so just really quickly, we're not even going to have a chance for you to, some people have already mentioned what their latest release is, so just give us the title of your latest release. If you told us the latest release, just tell us what's up next, just the title, and how we can follow you and buy your books. And we'll start, Bellen, do you have anything else coming out?
Well, in March next year, I'm going to have a journal, like an interactive journal, and I'm also working on like a series. And then you can like buy my books. You can buy my book, my children's book, off of Target online, and like and Amazon, and my website, which is www.morrison.com.
Can I add something?
Yes.
So I wanted to this is more for, I think, for the children who are listening also. Some of the other things I know, one of the other series that Bellen really loved when she was little was actually the Ruby series that I think Derrick is actually the author of. speaking to just the joy. So Bellen's activism, I think, really was just in her being who she was, just being able to go into the schools, you know, this little brown girl with a big afro, and being able to, you know, and who loved that space, who thought that school was very much, you know, meant and intended for her, and that he's went into the classroom really expecting the absolute most, just really being very optimistic about what she was about to embark on. She mentioned being younger. That is because she skipped a grade, and so she was just really eager and excited. And then going into that space, and I've often heard her say, you know, I'm in this space, and I just didn't, you know, when I heard that skin color language, I didn't want. It was surprising. Like I wasn't angry, I wasn't hurt, but I was very confused. And so I didn't want anything to stand to disrupt that space that I felt very much a part of, that I knew intuitively that I belonged in, and that I should be fully accepted and fully embraced in. And so, you know, I just want, and because, you know, Bellen is, you know, she's to some degree modest, and, you know, and so I wanted just to, you know, just in celebrating, you know, joy and activism, and sort of seeing the intersectionality, I guess, in all of those things, just to really be able to bring that out to, and, you know, the joy and the activism is just in being who she is, and being able to, and that has resonated. That is what resonates most with kids, and that's why, you know, she to this day she receives over 500 letters and drawings from kids around the world, you know, to her, just saying thank you for your work. Even older, you know, people who now feel validated, I think, for being in those classrooms and not feeling seen, are also writing to her. I think the oldest person who's ever written to her was almost 90 years old. So I just wanted to, because I just feel like.
Thanks so much, Mom. And that's why I said she's really the poster child for activism, and certainly for joy as well, because we all deserve to see ourselves represented not only in children's books but also in boxes of crayons. Demi?
So I think my most recent release was The Sun Does Shine, which is nonfiction, and coming up, I believe next summer or fall, is my first early reader series called Makeda Makes.
My most recent book is called Our World of Dumplings, and I have another title, When Father Comes Home, and it's available basically on all platforms. And you can follow me on Instagram. It's just my name, Sara Jung Art.
My latest release is Standing in the Need of Prayer, illustrated by Frank Morrison. The subtitle of the book is A Modern Retelling of the Classic Spiritual, and you can follow me on Twitter at Poet Weatherford, and I'm Carole Weatherford on Facebook and Instagram.
My latest release is Standing in the Need of Prayer, and you can find me on Frank Morrison on Instagram and Facebook.
My next book comes out next Tuesday, entitled Victory Stand. It's my first graphic novel. Very excited about it. I'm working on my first animation project with Apple TV. So I have 2 books coming out next year. So busy.
Do we have time for questions or not?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, they did all their talking. Give them a hand, please. Thank you, Carole. It was a wonderful panel, but you all did all the talking and answered all the questions. So, but what I do want to encourage you all to do is go to look at the books, and you can purchase books, and you can have them sign the books. Finally, as you were talking about joy and activism, the title of this book fair is Reading as Resistance. That in fact, the entire act of reading, and for those of you who have done historic research on reading in the 17th century for Black folks, was not something that was legal, right? So the act of just learning to read became activism. I contend that our ability to read and our ability to think critically continues to be a way to be an activist. And I encourage all of us to do that as much as possible. And then develop those things that these people have developed to actually then express what it is that we are critically thinking. So I want to thank every one of them. Please get their books, have them sign their books. We have another panel that will start in here at 1 o'clock, I believe. So going out, have some book signing, and then Frank is going to do some illustrations on the first floor for people to participate in. So thank you.